Have you ever been seconds away from losing your own life? I'm not talking about traffic scares or those moments where you say, "Wow, that was close." I'm talking about those eternal seconds where you feel the ice crawling up your spine, where every beat of your heart echoes like a war drum in your chest, and you realize that maybe this is the last time you'll ever breathe. My name is, well, you can call me Officer Johnson. 15 years on the force. 15 years protecting and serving. 15 years walking that thin blue line between good and evil. 15 years walking the tightrope between life and death. And in all those years, never has an incident affected me as much as the one I'm about to tell you about today. It was a Friday night, 11:47 p.m. I remember because I glanced at my watch when the radio crackled for the third time that night. The dispatcher's voice cut through the silence of our patrol car like a blade. "All units, we have a code 3, possible robbery in progress, 340 Maple Street, hostages involved, armed suspects. All units respond." Code 3, the two words that make any police officer's blood run cold. My partner, Officer Martinez, looked at me differently that night. You know when you feel like something's not going to work out? When the air gets heavier? When even the roar of the patrol car's engine seems louder? That's exactly how I felt. I turned on the siren and sped down the main avenue. Blue and red lights danced on the buildings around us as if the city itself knew something terrible was about to happen. Costa checked his ammunition, and I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The distance to Rua das Palmeiras was only 8 minutes. 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. 8 minutes where my mind played a movie of my entire life. My wife, my children, my mother calling every day to ask if I was okay. I didn't know it, but those were the last moments of my life where I still felt invincible. We arrived at the location at 11:55 p.m., and that's when everything changed. Maple Street at night looked like something out of a horror movie. A light rain began to fall, creating an eerie reflection on the wet asphalt. Our sirens cut through the darkness like beams of red and blue light, painting the walls of the buildings with colors that seemed to scream danger. I turned off the siren as we approached number 340. The silence that followed was unsettling. You know that silence that weighs on your chest? That silence that makes you realize even the crickets have stopped chirping. Martinez pointed to the alleyway beside the building. Shadows were moving. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't stray cats. It was people. And these people clearly didn't want to be seen. "Johnson, are you seeing this?" Martinez whispered, turning off the patrol car radio to avoid any unnecessary noise. "I see. At least 3 silhouettes, maybe 4. I got out of the squad car first, my hand instinctively going to my holster. The wet pavement made a subtle crunch beneath my boots, a noise I wouldn't normally notice, but that night every sound seemed amplified tenfold. The building where the incident occurred was one of those old apartment buildings, 5 stories tall, with a rusty exterior fire escape and small windows that looked like empty eyes watching us. The facade was dilapidated, with several areas lacking streetlights. The perfect place for an ambush. Martinez went around the right flank while I went around the left. Basic protocol: never enter through the same area as your partner. Always maintain 2 escape routes. As I approached the alley, I could hear muffled voices. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was aggressive, urgent. There was also a sound that completely chilled me: muffled crying. Someone was gagged. Base, Unit 247 on scene. Suspicious movement confirmed. Possible hostage situation confirmed. Request immediate backup, I whispered into the handheld radio. 247, backup on the way. ETA 5 minutes. Hold position 5 minutes. An eternity when lives are at stake. I grabbed my tactical flashlight and gave a silent signal to Martinez. He waved back, indicating he'd also confirmed suspicious movement on his side. Protocol dictated we wait for backup, but the crying was getting more desperate. That's when I saw the first gun. A chrome revolver gleamed in the dim light of the street lamp. The hand holding it was nervous, shaking. This told me 2 things. First, that the person was probably under the influence of some substance. Second, that guns in the hands of nervous people are ticking time bombs. Martinez, visual confirmed weapon. Suspect appears to be altered. Roger, I have visuals of 2 suspects on my side. One of them has what appears to be a sawed-off shotgun. Sawed-off shotgun. My stomach sank. These weapons are devastating at close range. If the situation escalated, our chances of emerging unscathed would diminish drastically. The layout of the location was our enemy. The alley was narrow with several piles of trash and a dumpster creating blind spots. There was an emergency staircase just above, which meant the suspects might have a height advantage. And worst of all, there was only one escape route for the victims, should they manage to free themselves. "Johnson, did you hear that?" I stopped breathing to listen better. A muffled scream, then the unmistakable sound of a shot being loaded into the chamber. "They're getting nervous. We need to act. Backup isn't here yet, man. If we go in now, If we don't go in now, we might not have any more victims to save. Martinez looked at me through the light rain. He knew I was right. 15 years of experience told me the situation was deteriorating rapidly. When criminals get nervous, two things can happen. Either they flee or they do something stupid, and from what I could see, running away wasn't in their plans. Base for 247. What's the status? Base, situation critical. Multiple armed suspects confirmed. Victims in imminent danger. We cannot wait for backup. 247, hold position. Backup is 2 minutes away. 2 minutes. In two life or death situations, 2 minutes is 2 centuries. That's when I heard the scream that changed everything. A scream of pure agony came from the end of the alley. It was no longer a muffled cry. It was real pain. I looked at Martinez. He nodded. We both knew time was up. Let's go in. You cover the left, I'll go right. If things go wrong, it's not going to go to shit, Johnson. Not today. Lie. We both knew it could go terribly wrong. We checked our weapons one last time. Bulletproof vests adjusted. Tactical flashlights ready. I took a deep breath. The metallic taste of fear in my mouth. It was when we entered the alley that we realized there weren't 3 or 4 suspects. There were 7, and everyone was looking right at us. For a split second, the whole world stopped. 7 pairs of eyes stared at us. 7 guns pointed in our direction, and in their midst, tied to the ground, were 2 people, a man in his 50s and a young woman, probably his daughter. Both were wide-eyed with pure terror. Time works strangely in situations like this. My brain processed the entire scene in milliseconds, suspects' positions, weapon types, escape routes, available cover. But at the same time, it felt like we were all stuck in slow motion. Police, drop your weapons now! My voice echoed through the alley like thunder. Martinez repeated the command from the opposite side. But I already knew they weren't going to cooperate. I could see it in their eyes. They were drugged, desperate, and worst of all, they had nothing left to lose. The suspect closest to me, a thin guy with neck tattoos, held that chrome revolver I'd seen earlier. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. Cocaine or crack, for sure. "Fuck you, pig," he yelled, spittle flying from his mouth. That's when everything turned into chaos. The first shot came from him. The bullet passed so close to my head that I felt the air rush. The noise was deafening in that confined space, a boom that instantly made my ears ring. I dove behind a dumpster just as the other suspects opened fire. It was like all hell had broken loose in the alley. Bang, bang, bang. Bullets ricocheted off the brick walls, sparks flying in every direction. The smell of burning gunpowder filled my lungs, mixed with the smell of rotting garbage and rain. "Martinez, are you okay? I'm alive, but I'm stuck here." I heard his voice coming from across the alley, but I could barely process the words over the sound of the gunshots. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it was going to burst from my chest. I took a deep breath and positioned myself to fight back, my Glock 40 in hand, loaded and locked. 15 years of training had taken over my body automatically. "Drop your weapons, last chance." The response was another burst of gunfire. The windows of the building above began to explode from the stray shots. Shards of glass rained down on the wet ground like deadly hail. Somewhere someone was screaming. Probably apartment residents. I counted mentally. At least 15 shots had already been fired. Some of the suspects would have to reload soon. This was my chance. I peeked around the container and spotted the guy with the sawed-off shotgun Martinez had mentioned. Tall, burly, wearing a Lakers cap. He was reloading, his hands shaking as he tried to chamber the shells. I looked. Bang! My shot caught him in the right shoulder. He spun and fell, the shotgun flying from his hands. A scream of pain echoed through the alley. "Johnson! Be careful on your left!" I turned my head instinctively. Another suspect had flanked me from the side, using the fire escape to gain a higher position. He had an automatic pistol. It looked like a Taurus 380. Bang, 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 bang. 4 shots in quick succession. 3 missed, but the 4th, I felt the impact like a punch to the chest. My ballistic vest absorbed most of the impact, but the force threw me backward. I slammed my back into the building's wall, the air rushing out of my lungs like a punctured balloon. For a second, I thought I was dead. The pain was indescribable, as if someone had hit my chest with a hammer. I tried to breathe but could only cough, the taste of blood filling my mouth. "Johnson! Johnson!" Martinez's voice seemed to come from far away, as if I were underwater. My vision blurred, black spots dancing in front of me. "No, not today, not like this." I forced my eyes to focus. The hostages were still there, crying, silently begging for help. The older man had a wound on his forehead, probably from a stray bullet. With strength I didn't know I still had, I braced myself against the wall and got back into a fighting stance. My right hand was shaking, but my aim was still good. The suspect on the stairs was reloading. Fatal error. Bang! Bang! 2 shots to the center of mass. He fell down the stairs like a sack of potatoes, hitting the floor with a thud, but there were still 5 left. And that's when I realized the worst. My hearing was compromised by the gunshots, my vision was still a little blurry from the impact, and I could feel something warm running down the side of my vest. Blood. Apparently, one of the bullets had found a gap between the vest's plates. Martinez, I'm bleeding. Hang in there, partner. Backup is coming. But I knew 5 minutes was an eternity, and from the screams I could hear, the remaining suspects were growing increasingly desperate. That's when I heard the sound that made my blood run cold, the unmistakable click of a grenade being armed. Grenade! Grenade! Get out of here! But there was nowhere to run. 3.5 seconds. That's how much time you have from the moment a grenade is armed until it explodes. 3.5 seconds to make the most important decision of your life. The suspect holding the grenade was just a boy. No more than 17, but his eyes were those of someone who had already lost everything. He stood in the middle of the alley, holding that small metal sphere like it was his last card on the table. Nobody move or I'll let go. 3 seconds. Martinez was on the other side, trapped behind a pile of rubble. Even if he tried to run, he wouldn't make it in time. The hostages were tied to the ground, unable to move, and I could barely stand. 2.5 seconds. That's when my training took over. 15 years in the force teaches you that sometimes you have to make impossible decisions. Sometimes you have to choose between saving yourself or saving others. 2 seconds. Run. Not in the opposite direction of the grenade. I ran towards it. Johnson! No! Martinez's voice echoed behind me, but I'd already made up my mind. If I could tackle the boy before the 2 seconds were left, maybe I could throw the grenade far enough away that the explosion wouldn't kill the hostages. 1.5 seconds. My body collided with his with the force of an NFL linebacker. We both fell to the sodden ground, the grenade flying from his hands in what seemed like a slow-motion trajectory. 1 second. I watched the grenade roll across the wet ground, coming to rest under an abandoned car, about 10 meters from the hostages. Far enough? I hoped so. 1/2 second. I covered the boy with my body and closed my eyes. Boom! The world exploded. The shockwave hit me like an invisible wall. My ears instantly stopped working. There was only a constant high-pitched ringing. I felt shards of metal and concrete raining down on me like deadly hail. The heat of the explosion seared my exposed face. The smell of gunpowder and molten metal assaulted my nose. For a few seconds I felt nothing but pure pain radiating throughout my body. When I finally managed to open my eyes, the world had completely changed. The car where the grenade had exploded was now just a twisted, smoking wreck. Windows in at least 5 buildings had been shattered. A crater nearly 1 meter in diameter pocked the asphalt where solid pavement had once been. I tried to stand and immediately collapsed. My left leg wasn't responding properly. I looked down and saw blood trickling from a deep laceration in my thigh. A piece of shrapnel had found its way through the equipment. Martinez! Martinez! You! My own voice sounded strange, distant. I tried to scream, but all I could manage was a hoarse whisper. I turned my head, searching for my partner. He was lying about 50 feet to my right, motionless. My heart sank. A dark puddle was forming beneath his head. No, 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 no! I forced my body to move, dragging myself along the ground. Every inch was pure agony. Shards of glass cut my hands. My injured leg left a trail of blood on the wet asphalt. When I finally reached him, I could see that he was still breathing. A deep cut on his forehead was bleeding heavily, but his eyes moved when I called to him. Martinez, talk to me, man. Johnson, the hostages. The hostages. I forced my body to turn toward them. To my relief, they were both still alive, but clearly in shock. The older man had shrapnel wounds in his arm, and the young woman had blood running from a cut on her face, but they were alive. It was then that I realized there were still 4 suspects, and the explosion hadn't neutralized them. In fact, it had done the opposite. Now they knew exactly where we were, and we were completely vulnerable. I tried to reach for my gun, but my right arm wasn't working properly. My shoulder had been dislocated by the impact of the explosion. My Glock was somewhere in the wreckage, probably buried under concrete and twisted metal. Johnson, my gun. Get my gun. Martinez tried to point at his holster, but his hand was shaking uncontrollably. I could see the pistol was still there, but he didn't have the strength to draw it. I crawled over to him and grabbed the Glock. My left hand, the only one still working properly, trembled as I held the gun. I'd never shot with my non-dominant hand in a real-life situation. That's when I heard footsteps approaching. They were coming to finish the job. I tried to position myself to protect Martinez and the hostages, but I could barely stay conscious. The blood loss was making me dizzy, and my vision was starting to blur around the edges. Johnson, you need to call backup. My radio had been destroyed in the explosion. Martinez's was damaged, crackling with static, and my cell phone was somewhere in the wreckage. It was then that I realized the terrible reality of our situation. We were completely isolated, wounded, without communication, and 4 armed criminals were approaching to execute us. I heard voices approaching. They were talking casually, as if discussing the weather. "Finish off those pigs now. And the hostages. Finish everyone. There can be no witnesses left." With what little strength I had left, I pointed Martinez's gun at the vocals. My left hand shook so badly I could barely aim. A shadow appeared at the mouth of the alley. Then another and another. 3 suspects, all armed, walked calmly toward us like predators approaching wounded prey. I pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. Martinez had used up all his ammunition in the initial confrontation. The suspects laughed when they heard the sound of the empty gun. "It's over, pig." I closed my eyes and thought of Sarah, of Emma, of Jake, of all the times my mother had told me to be careful. "Sorry, Mom. It won't work this time." That's when I heard the most beautiful sound of my life. Sirens, lots of sirens, very close. The sirens weren't just the backup we'd requested. From the sound of it, there were at least 6 police cars, maybe more. The explosion had alerted the entire city. Firefighters, ambulances, SWAT, everyone was coming. The 3 suspects stopped dead in their tracks when they heard the sound. One of them, a bald man with a scar on his face, glanced nervously at the alley entrance. "Shit, they called the army. Let's get this over with and get out of here." The second suspect raised his pistol, aiming directly at my head. I was still on the ground, practically immobilized, using my body to shield Martinez. The first patrol cars arrived in full force. Red and blue lights flooded the alley like stadium spotlights. The sound of doors slamming echoed off the walls like gunshots. "Police department, drop your weapons." It was Sergeant Williams' voice. I recognized it immediately. 15 years working together, and I'd never been so happy to hear that raspy voice. The suspects quickly positioned themselves. They knew they were cornered, but they still had the hostages. They still had the upper hand. "We have hostages! Back off, or we'll kill everyone!" the scarred man screamed, putting his gun to the young woman's head. She cried even louder, the heartbreaking sound echoing off the walls. Williams wasn't stupid. He knew that in a hostage situation, you don't go in shooting. You negotiate. You buy time. But I also knew these guys weren't interested in negotiation. They were desperate. "Johnson, Johnson, can you hear me?" Williams' voice came to me through a megaphone. I tried to respond, but all I could manage was a hoarse groan. My throat was dry, and the blood loss was making me weaker and weaker. Martinez, who was half-conscious beside me, managed to whisper, Tell him there are 4 suspects. 1 is still out there." 4? I only saw 3. Where was the 4th? It was then that I realized the trap. The 3 suspects in the alley were a diversion. The 4th was positioning himself somewhere with a tactical advantage, probably in an apartment window or on the roof. I tried to warn Williams, but my voice wouldn't come out. I forced myself to move, dragging myself a few inches to get into a position where I could be seen by the patrol cars. "Williams!" I managed to shout, using all the strength I had left. "Sniper! There's a sniper!" I don't know if he heard me, but I saw movement in the patrol cars. Police officers began to spread out, seeking high ground. The scar guy got nervous at my attempt to communicate. "Shut up, pig!" He pointed the gun at me and pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet grazed my left ear. I felt the heat of the projectile, then the warm blood running down my neck. A few more inches to the right and it would have been fatal, but that shot was a tactical error. He had given away his exact position to the SWAT snipers. Target acquired. Sector 3. I heard a radio call from one of the patrol cars. SWAT had arrived and was getting into position. That's when everything happened at once. A well-aimed shot came from above, probably from a sniper positioned in the building next door. The scarred man fell instantly, a red stain spreading across his chest. The other 2 suspects panicked completely. One began firing randomly at the police cars. The other ran to the side of the alley, trying to use the hostages as a human shield. "Go! Go! Go!" Williams and his team entered the alley like a well-oiled machine. Ballistic shields, helmets, coordinated movement. It was like watching a war orchestra. The suspect, who was firing randomly, was shot 3 times in the chest before he could even reload. He fell backward into the puddle of dirty water, his gun clattering on the concrete. There was only 1 left, and he still had the young woman as a hostage. "I'll kill her, I swear I will." He was clearly panicked, the gun trembling in his hand as he pressed it against her head. Tears were streaming down his face. He was younger than I'd initially realized, probably no older than 20. Williams approached slowly, hands raised, no weapon visible. "Calm down, kid. No one needs to die here. Drop the gun and let's talk." "No, "You killed my brothers." They chose the hard path. You can still choose differently. I could see in the boy's eyes that he was considering. Survival instinct was fighting against desperation and anger. That's when the fourth suspect, the one Martinez had mentioned, appeared. A loud bang came from above. Williams fell to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Blood trickled between his fingers. "Sniper! Sniper in the building!" The chaos resumed, but this time I knew where the shooter was. I'd seen the muzzle flash. 3rd floor, 2nd window from the left. With my last bit of strength, I picked up a rock from the ground and threw it toward the police cars, not to hurt anyone but to attract attention. One of the officers saw me pointing up. He followed my direction and spoke into the radio. "3rd floor, 2nd window left. Confirmed target." Crack. The SWAT sniper's shot was accurate. I saw a shadow fall from the 3rd-story window, hitting the roof of a parked car with a dull, metallic thud. With the shooter threat eliminated, Williams, even though wounded, returned to focusing on the final suspect. "It's over, kid. You're the last one. Drop the gun and no one else has to get hurt." The young suspect looked around. His companions were dead. Blood was everywhere. Sirens were wailing. Lights were flashing. The reality of the situation finally dawned on him. I just wanted money for my sister. She's sick." "I know, and we can talk about it. But first you need to let go of the lady." For long seconds no one moved. The boy looked between Williams and the hostage, tears mixed with blood on his young face. Finally, slowly, he lowered the gun. Okay, I surrender." The young woman collapsed to the ground, free but in complete shock. Paramedics rushed to her and the older man. Williams signaled to his team, and within seconds the last suspect was handcuffed and being loaded into an ambulance. Sirens fading, radio sounds, medical activity. It was only then, as the adrenaline began to wear off, that I realized how badly I was hurt. My vision was darkening around the edges, and I felt very cold despite the warmth of the night. Williams approached me, his own arm in a makeshift sling. "Johnson, you did an incredible job here. You saved everyone's lives." "Martinez." "How is Martinez?" "He'll be fine. Severe concussion, a few stitches, but he'll be fine." Paramedics placed me on a stretcher. As they lifted me up, I saw the full scene for the first time. 4 covered bodies, 2 civilians injured but alive, Martinez being treated but conscious, and Williams directing the operation despite being injured. We had survived. Against all odds, we had survived. But as the ambulance pulled away, I knew that night had changed something in me forever. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I remember fragments, the paramedic talking on the radio about my blood pressure, the smell of disinfectant mixed with blood, the ambulance's overhead lights passing like white streaks above me. But mostly, I remember the silence. Not the silence outside, there was a lot of noise around me. It was the silence inside, that strange emptiness that takes over your mind when you've just been through something you shouldn't have survived. "Officer Johnson, can you hear me? You need to stay awake for me." The paramedic's voice seemed to come from far away. I tried to respond, but my mouth was as dry as sand. I just nodded. "Good. You were very lucky today. The vest saved your life, but you have a shrapnel wound in your thigh and some lacerations. Nothing we can't fix. Luck." She called it luck. St. Mary's Hospital, 1:23 a.m. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room temporarily blinded me as I was wheeled in. Doctors and nurses moved around me like a rehearsed dance. Each one knew exactly what to do. "Police officer. Multiple injuries. Lost a lot of blood. Room 3 is available. I need a chest x-ray." Voices mingled in a medical jumble I couldn't fully process. My mind was still trapped in that alley, hearing the gunshots, feeling the impact of the grenade, seeing that boy's face as he surrendered. 3 hours later, I was in a hospital bed with 17 stitches in my thigh, 5 in my neck, and a mild concussion. The doctors said I would need to be observed for at least 24 hours. That's when Williams showed up. His arm was in a sling, but he looked much better than I felt. He pulled a chair up to my bed and sat down with a heavy sigh. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck, twice." He laughed, but it was a mirthless laugh. The kind of laugh you give when you don't know what else to do. "Martinez is fine. Concussion, like I said. About 20 stitches in his forehead, but the doctor said he'll be released tomorrow." "And the hostages?" "Jennifer Hayes, 24, nursing student. Robert Hayes, 52, her father. They're both going to be fine, physically. The word hung in the air between us like a shadow. Williams, those boys, were so young. I know. The last one, the one who surrendered. He said he wanted money for his sick sister." Williams nodded slowly. "Marcus Rodriguez, 19. His sister, Sophia, 12, has leukemia. The family has no health insurance." The knot in my stomach tightened even more. Shit, yeah, it really sucks. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Williams stared at the floor, I stared at the ceiling, both of us processing what had happened, both trying to understand how a normal night had turned into a war zone. Johnson, you saved 4 lives today. Jennifer, Robert, Martinez, and probably mine too. Don't forget that. And we took 4 too. They made that choice, not you. I knew he was right. Intellectually, I knew. But that didn't make things any easier. I could still see the suspects' faces. I could still hear the sound of bullets hitting their bodies. I could still smell the gunpowder and blood. Will it get easier? I asked. Williams took a while to answer. No, it doesn't get easier. You just learn to carry the weight. That's when Sarah entered the room. My wife looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Her eyes were red from crying, and she practically ran to my bed when she saw me awake. Oh my God, David. I thought, when Williams called me, I thought. She couldn't finish her sentence. She simply threw herself at me, careful not to hurt my wounds, and cried into my chest. Williams quietly got up and headed for the door. I'll let you guys talk. Johnson, take your time. You have medical leave for as long as you need it. He left, closing the door gently behind him. The kids? I asked, stroking Sarah's hair. They're with my mum. I told her Dad had to work late. She pulled back a little to look at me. David, I saw the news. They said there was a war downtown. That was almost it. You almost died? The question hung between us. I could lie, try to minimize what happened, but after 15 years of marriage, Sarah deserved the truth. Yes. Several times, fresh tears began to stream down her face. I can't do this anymore, David. I can't stay awake every night wondering if you're coming home anymore. Sarah, no, let me talk. She took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. I love you. I love the man you are. I love that you want to help people, but I also love our children, and they need their father. She was right. Emma was only 8. Jake was 5. They needed me alive, not a dead hero. I thought of them tonight, he said softly. When I thought I was going to die, I thought of you 3. That's what kept me going. Then you understand why I'm saying this. I understand. But understanding didn't make the decision any easier. Being a police officer wasn't just my job. It was who I was. It was my identity for 15 years. How do you just stop being who you've always been? I looked out the hospital window. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city streets, washing away the blood, washing away the evidence of what had happened just hours before, but I couldn't wash away the memories. Sarah, I need to tell you something. What? When I saw that grenade being armed, when I realized that I might not get out of there alive, the first thing I thought about wasn't me, it was you, it was how you were going to be. David, but the second thing I thought was, I can't let those people die, and I would run toward that grenade again, even though I knew the risk. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I know, and that's why I love you, and that's why I'm so scared. We stood there in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The weight of the night was beginning to settle in, not just the physical weight of our injuries, but the emotional weight of what had happened. 4 people dead, 2 families destroyed, a 19-year-old boy who now faces decades in prison, a 12-year-old with cancer who lost his older brother. And somewhere in the city, 2 people, Jennifer and Robert Hayes, were trying to process the trauma of nearly having their lives taken by complete strangers. It's going to be okay, Sarah whispered, more to herself than to me. But we both knew it wasn't true. Some things never turn out right. Some nights leave a lasting mark on you. Sarah fell asleep in the chair next to my bed around 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of that night. The grenade rolling to the ground, the boy's face as he surrendered, the sound of gunshots echoing through the alley. At 6:30 a.m., a nurse came to check my vitals. The movements were gentle, professional, and she tried not to wake Sarah. How are you feeling this morning, Officer Johnson? Physically? Better. Mentally? I paused, searching for the right words. Still processing. She nodded with an understanding smile. It's normal. You've been through significant trauma. It will take time. Time. Everyone talked about time as if it were a magic pill, as if one day you'd wake up and simply forget that you almost died, that you saw people die, that you had to make decisions that changed lives forever, and that was definitely one of them. Sarah fell asleep in the chair next to my bed around 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of that night, the grenade rolling to the ground, the boy's face as he surrendered, the sound of gunshots echoing through the alley. At 6:30 a.m., a nurse came to check my vitals. The movements were gentle, professional, and she tried not to wake Sarah. How are you feeling this morning, Officer Johnson? Physically? Better. Mentally? I paused, searching for the right words. Still processing. She nodded with an understanding smile. It's normal. You've been through significant trauma. It will take time. Time. Everyone talked about time as if it were a magic pill, as if one day you'd wake up and simply forget that you almost died, that you saw people die, that you had to make decisions that changed lives forever. At 7 a.m., Williams returned. He seemed to have slept even less than I had. How was your night? Awake. Thinking. On. About everything. About whether it's worth it. about whether I'm still good enough for this. Williams pulled the chair closer. Johnson, you've served 15 years. 15 years saving lives, protecting innocents, making a difference. One bad night doesn't erase an entire career of exemplary work. But what if it's not just a bad night? What if it's a sign? Sign of what? That maybe I should have stopped before I came so close to not coming home. Williams was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, more personal. Johnson, you want to know the truth? I've thought about leaving this life at least 100 times in the last 20 years. Every time I lose a partner, every time I see a child hurt by violence, every time my wife looks at me with that fear in her eyes. But you never let go. No, and you know why? Because last night, Jennifer Hayes will wake up in her father's house instead of a morgue. Because Marcus Rodriguez will have a chance at redemption instead of dying at 19. Because you had the courage to run toward danger when any sane person would run in the opposite direction. Sarah woke to our low voices. She stretched and looked between us. Good morning, Sergeant Williams. Good morning, Sarah. How are you dealing with all this? Honestly, I'm terrified. She looked directly at me. David, you need to know that no matter what you decide, I'll support you. If you want to keep going, I'll teach you how to deal with the fear. If you want to stop, we'll figure out what's next together. It was at that moment that I realized how lucky I was. Not because I'd survived the night before. That was truly lucky, but because I had a family that supported me unconditionally. Williams, can I ask you a question? Of course. In your 20-year career, have you ever regretted any decision you made on the field? He thought for a long moment. Yes, some. But you know what I regret most? The times I hesitated. The times I played it too safe and someone got hurt because I didn't act fast enough. Dr. Peterson came in for one last check before discharge. After examining my stitches and checking my concussion, he sat on the edge of the bed. Physically, you will recover completely. Some scarring, maybe an occasional headache, but nothing permanent. And mentally, that's a different conversation. You've experienced significant trauma. PTSD is common in situations like yours. I strongly recommend that you seek professional help. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The words no police officer wants to hear, but many of us carry silently. Doctor, in your experience, people in my situation, do they ever go back to work? Some do, some don't. It depends on the person, the support system they have, how they process the trauma. There is no right or wrong answer. 2 hours later, Sarah was driving me home. The drive was silent for the most part, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When we got to our street, I saw our neighbors in the yard. Mrs. Martinez, our neighbor of 8 years, came running when she saw me get out of the car. David, I saw it on the news. My God, how are you? I'm fine, Mrs. Martinez. Thank you for asking. You're a hero. Everyone in the neighborhood is talking about how you saved those people. Hero, another word that didn't seem to fit. Heroes were people in movies, people who saved the day without real consequences. I was just a guy who did his job and almost died in the process. Emma and Jake came running through the front door. The sight of their faces, concern mixed with relief, nearly made me cry right there on the sidewalk. Daddy, are you hurt? Emma asked, noticing the bandages. A little bit, Princess, but Daddy's fine. Did you catch the bad guys? Jake asked, with that innocent 5-year-old curiosity. Yes, son, we caught the bad guys. But as I spoke those words, I realized it wasn't that simple. We had stopped the bandits, yes, but at what cost? And how many other Marcus Rodriguez's were out there, desperate enough to try something like that? That night, after the kids went to bed, Sarah and I sat on the sofa in the living room, the same room where we watched movies on Sundays, where the kids played, where normal life happened. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I know what you're going to say. He knows. You've decided to continue. I see it in your eyes. She was right. In the last few hours, talking to Williams, seeing the children, thinking about Jennifer Hayes waking up safely at her father's house, I had made my decision. I can't stop, Sarah, not yet. I know it's selfish, I know it's hard for you, but David, she placed her hand on my face. I knew who I was marrying 15 years ago. I knew you wouldn't change just because I was scared. So you're okay with this? No, I'll never be okay with that. But I understand, and if you need to keep doing this work to be who you are, then we'll find a way to make it work. 3 weeks later, I returned to work. It wasn't easy. The first time I heard gunshots on the radio, my heart raced. The first time I walked into a dark alley, I felt that familiar tension in my chest. But I also felt something else, purpose. Martinez returned a week after me. We became partners again. The first day back, he looked at me as we got into the squad car and said, Johnson, thank you for covering for me that night. Thanks for covering for me too. And that was it. We never spoke directly about that night again. Some traumas are too great for words, but I learned something that night that changed how I view my work, my life, my family. I learned that the line between life and death is thinner than we imagine, that every call, could be our last. That every goodnight kiss could be our last. And most importantly, I learned that this shouldn't paralyze us. It should remind us of what really matters. So, for those of you listening, I leave you with this thought. We police officers choose to always walk that fine line between life and death, not because we're heroes, not because we're fearless, but because someone has to do this job. That Friday night 3 months ago, I almost didn't make it home. The grenade could have killed me. The bullets could have hit a few inches to the right. The sniper could have had better aim, but I came back. And today, when I hug my wife, when I read a story to my children, when I see Jennifer Hayes going back to nursing school, when I learn that Marcus Rodriguez is studying in prison, I understand why we do this. Because the difference between someone coming home or not is sometimes just one police officer willing to run toward danger when everyone else is running in the opposite direction. My name is Officer Johnson, and that was the night that almost took my life, but taught me why life is worth living.